Hello, hello. Hello, and welcome to Office Hour, August 12th. It's good to see everyone. If you're joining in from Twitter, I can't see you, so hop on over to the YouTube app so that you can interact with me directly in the comments. And you can remain relatively anonymous here on the YouTube platform unless your name is in your username. It'll be great to have you all over here for live interaction. So welcome to Under the Hood. This is an online community that I'm curating for STEM people and the friends and family of STEM people, where you can hear the behind the scenes experiences of those of us who have dedicated our lives to STEM. Just as a disclaimer, if you do have a concern about an issue related to Title IX, please discuss that issue with your authorized representative on campus. The work that I do over here on Under the Hood is covered under Title IX. The views that I express here do not reflect that of my current or previous institutions. Okay, so as promised, as advertised, I'm going to be talking today about burnout and then restorative care. And so week to week, I think about what I'm going to talk about. And usually it's themes around things that are currently happening in my day-to-day activities. And so today's office hour is about burnout. Also, I saw some things online that I thought would be important to address based on some really good commentary on TikTok. So let's start off by watching a clip by Ask Courtney, who seems to be pretty popular on TikTok. Yeah, so I hope you all were able to hear that TikTok. It was pretty profound. I think that Ask Courtney touches on a lot of important things, things that really resonate with me as a human being. So she's essentially explaining to us, she being Courtney, about what your body does after a pretty long and extended period of being in survival mode, right? So she talked about not wanting to clean. You don't have the energy to talk to people. Your mental energy is down. How you might have been a go-getter before the onslaught of the trauma. And I can tell you that this response to being in an extended period of survival mode is real. I have experienced it, and it was pretty impactful to the point that I thought it was my personality. I thought it was just my baseline, but indeed I was in survival mode, and I'm slowly coming out of that. So Courtney also said that once your body realizes that, or your brain realizes that it's safe to take a break, and give your ancient brain some credit for its highly intuitive nature. That's your medulla oblongata. It's the base of our brain. Sorry, neuro people, if I'm getting that wrong. But your intuitive nature knows how to scan the environment for danger. It knows when you're okay. It knows when you can relax. So when your body does come out of survival mode slowly, you're going to shut down a little bit, or what you think is shutting down. But Courtney explains to us that it's actually you, and your body forcing you into restorative rest. So, yeah, I'm going to talk more about those and other things in just a second. So thank you to Ask Courtney. So I want to talk a little bit more about survival mode and what we as STEM folks may be going through right now. So and I'll talk about this in the slides I have coming up. Over the last 2 years, actually 3, all right, so 2020, 2021, and we're nearing the end of 2022, we've been in survival mode collectively as a planet, some more than others. So we slowly edged out of quote unquote survival mode, or some of us are still at the height of it because of the vaccine. So with the availability of the COVID vaccine, we kind of relaxed in our ability to pseudo resume regular life, so to speak. And so that allows us to sort of relax a little bit. But what I'm going to talk about in a minute are the things that keep us on edge. And I venture to say that while we are not in the depths of survival mode like we were in 2020, we still are in this period of like collective trauma. Now, the other thing I want to touch on before I talk about all this is I want to recognize and address what's going on with millennials, Zoomers, and Generation Alpha. Okay, those are the 3 youngest generations right now. And we may even be entering into Generation Beta. I'm not sure. I know Generation Alpha starts at 2009. So we are not inheriting the world that our parents, grandparents, great grandparents were born and raised in. We're just not. And that's important to us because most of us are at childbearing age, or we will be having children, going off to college, and hitting a lot of major milestones over the next 20 to 30 years. Collectively, for the younger people, we're experiencing compounded trauma, not only for things that have happened, but for our sense of grief over the opportunity lost due to inflation, due to climate change. Those two, really. So for those of you that interface with millennials, Zoomers, and Gen Alpha, please have some extra grace for them, because not only are they staring at years lost in their formative years for the past 3 years, but we're staring down a future that looks nothing like what we were promised. So we have to keep that in mind. Now I want to talk about the thesis for today, which is burnout and restoration. So I'm going to talk about coping and strategies, the things that most people recommend that we do, and some things that I personally do. This is not to be patronizing, because everyone is going to experience this time in their own way. But I think we need to have a conversation about burnout as we're entering into the third fall semester, particularly for those of us that are teachers, instructors, professors, and students, and the parents of students, the caregivers of students, the spouses of teachers. This is not an easy time for us, particularly because, as predicted by the climate scientists and the ecologists, there has been an unleashing of pestilence that was dormant or even wiped out. And we knew this was going to happen. And it just so happens that COVID weakens the immune system in a way that allows those pestilence to thrive. So let's keep going. So forgive me for presenting a popular media article. Yes, I know I can find scholarly literature on this, but this was just really accessible. So this is an article from CNBC. The title is "The U.S. is Wrapped in Collective Grief from School, You Can Read the Rest, and the Pandemic. And it's rewiring our brains, experts say." So that's pretty self-explanatory. This was an article that was published in May of 2022. And I just found it to be pretty encompassing of what we all may be experiencing right now. So in a quote by Nora Gross, a PhD holder and visiting assistant professor of sociology at Boston College, she is quoted in this article as saying, "We can also be collectively grieving for the loss of a way of life, a foreclosed future, or a set of unrealized ideals." So that's what I just talked about before I got into the slides. As in the pandemic, climate grief, or our collective grief over the scourge of genuine violence in our country. That's a word. And so if anyone right now that's listening, or you are the friend or family member of someone in STEM, or anybody, if you're not feeling like yourself, there's a pretty good reason why, or a few good reasons why you may just not be feeling yourself. And I don't sit here and speak on a soapbox. I am speaking from someone who has been in survival mode for 17 years. Maybe more than that. Maybe some of the people I grew up with don't even realize that in middle school, in high school, I was in survival mode. Yeah, because things were happening behind the scenes that I couldn't talk about. And so as we roll into the pandemic and the events that have been happening in our schools, I don't take it lightly. And I have empathy for people for whom these are the first major things that they've had to go through. And it's not easy. So I want to read a little bit more from that article. about how the collective grief may be changing how our brains are processing things. No, this is not an academic article. This is expertise from someone that has been interviewed by a CNBC journalist. So, how do our brains process collective grief? All right. So, events like, you can read that on the screen, often make people realize that untimely that is possible in their own lives rather than something that only happens to other people. And I'm skipping over certain words because there is like this algorithm that flags your videos as inappropriate if you say certain words. We internalize threat, which leads to grief, anxiety, fear, and so much more, Flint says. Stress hormones flood our bodies. Let me pause. Stress hormones are something serious. Cortisol, adrenaline, all right? If you're constantly stressed, or even if you're passively stressed by looking at social media, your body may be producing these hormones, which may lead you to like gain weight and you don't really know why. It can influence your hunger and your ability to regulate your emotions. Okay. So stress hormones flood our bodies and we feel out of control. Without us realizing it, a fight or flight, excuse me, a fight, flight, or fear response becomes what controls our reactions. All right. So all of us are probably real snappy these days. I'm snappy. I try not to be. And it's because we're just surging with these survival mode hormones or stress hormones. People that are normally really chill, if they're going through this, is probably why. In that sense, she says, collective grief and trauma are tightly linked. And according to a growing body of research, these are active links, trauma can effectively rewire the brain, at least temporarily, affecting people's ability to reason and impairing their day-to-day decision-making abilities. All right. So when you're under stress, you become more impulsive. You have a tendency toward your vices, right? Being whatever your vices are. And being in a constant state of fight or flight is not fun. There were days in my 20s where I just prayed for a boring day. I was like, can I just have a boring day where nothing is happening? Because you just get tired of always being like under stress. If a single tragedy can result in all that, it's hard to imagine the collective impact on the country of more than 2 years of constant losses from the C-19 pandemic. Those kinds of events I'm highlighting on the screen, domestic that, and other mass those. So give yourself a break. Sorry, y'all. This is not normal. It's just not normal. And then for us in our childbearing years to be thinking about whether or not we want to have children. Not in this article is the mention of what's going on in the Supreme Court in regard to women's rights. Okay. So all that happened around the same time. And I was like, oh yeah, it's not safe for me to bear children in this country. So if you find yourself thinking in ways that you haven't before, just give yourself some grace. The collective trauma of the past several years has slowly begun to erode our resilience and hope. Okay. We're going to talk about ways to build that hope back up. Our brains have not practiced what it takes to cope with these enormous losses one after another. We haven't. I don't know. I just got back into therapy, not for this stuff, but something that got piled on all this stuff kind of just pushed me over the edge. The cumulative effect of this has yet to be seen. Yeah, where are we going to see these cumulative effects? Perhaps in the birth rate, perhaps in domestic V, the crumbling of, I'm not trying to be doomer here. We will talk about strategies in just a second that I borrowed from this part of the article. But all of this to say, give yourself some grace if you find yourself behaving in ways that you don't understand, ways that you haven't been raised to cope with. Like if you're normally a chill person and you've never had to like perform under pressure, show up to work when you're feeling depressed, it may be time to actively develop new coping strategies. And I'm going to talk about active coping in just a minute. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Right, and so I've already highlighted this quote from the article from Associate Professor Melissa Flint, a PsyD of Clinical Psychology at Midwestern University in Glendale. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that. Okay. And so it would not be a genuine, authentic conversation if I didn't bring up the other stuff that added to our collective grief. Okay. Obviously, due to the C-19 pandemic and its origins, there was quite an onslaught of anti-Asian hate going on in the United States. And it was absolutely disgusting. I apologize. Not that I did anything, but I'm sorry. Because a lot of that stuff, not all of it, was done at the hands of Black people. And sorry, folks, you cannot be victim and aggressor at the same time. You just can't. That goes for women, that goes for Black people, that goes for minorities, that goes for anybody who wears the label of marginalized group. You cannot wear a victim label, but also be an abuser. So I'm holding myself accountable here. You know, if I'm going to call out things, you know, from like a victim standpoint, I also need to make sure that I am not exacting hurt on anyone else. So I was absolutely disgusted with what was going on with the Asian community in the US. Also, I'll tell you this. Some of the kindest people I know that have treated me with nothing but respect consistently were people from the Asian community. And I know that Asian is very broad. So it's just discussing the ways in which minority groups have been pitted against each other, because sometimes we are our strongest allies. So as you can see in the other part of the picture, there's a Black Lives Matter sign. And obviously, the onslaught of the pandemic raised or just shined a spotlight on anti-Blackness in the United States. And that anti-Blackness pervades the healthcare system, policy, economics, education, reproductive rights. This was depressing. Okay. On a personal note, in the summer of 2020, when I should have been submitting a career proposal, for those of you that don't know what that is, the National Science Foundation gives the opportunity for early career professors to submit what's called a career proposal that is meant to support you for over 5 years or for 5 years. And it's a mashup of research and education activities. So I was out of the game in 2020 because I was looking at this stuff and I was overwhelmed with grief with what was going on with our healthcare and with what was going on with racial uprising in the United States. Oh, fun fact, 2021, I wasn't able to submit either. I was moving institutions because of things related to, I just won't talk about it. I'm happy to be where I am. So it was tough. And this type of stuff impacted scholars in ways that we we can guess, not being able to participate in conferences, a lag in publishing papers, etc. But who knows what that cumulative effect will be when it's time for people to go up for promotion. That's everyone in STEM or everyone in academia. And then that third photo is in reference to what happened on January 6th, 2021. We remember what happened. For a lot of people who are pretty strong patriots in this country, a lot of people lost hope. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. So for a lot of people, it was their first time seeing the government and not the government, but our country and people that look like them behave in a way that is just appalling to them in ways, whereas the first two photos may not get you, but a lot of people were struck by what happened on January 6th. It's been a lot. It's been a lot. Let's go to the next slide. So now I always like to balance the good and the bad some way. I don't like to be too doomer without offering some solutions and shining a light on, resilience and hope, even when, we're hanging on by a thread. So in response to all this that was happening during the pandemic, there were a few leaders in STEM, across healthcare, etc., that banded together and created these movements of solidarity of marginalized identities within STEM. I'm going to highlight a couple of those. One is Black in the Environment, or Black in Environment. This was led by Dominic Bednar and Professor Reagan Patterson. And Black in Environment is one of many Black in movements. You've got Black in Robotics, Black in Neuroscience, or Black in Neuro that just celebrated their week. Black in Computing, y'all, it's a lot. Black in X, which is everything. And I was pretty encouraged when I saw these movements, especially in a time where I was pretty debilitated by what I was seeing in the media. I was just holding on for dear life. While I couldn't really participate fully because I was just too overwhelmed, it was nice to get online and see the hashtags and see this coming together of folks in response to what was going on. And I believe this was a chain reaction from the birder event or the birder incident. So Black Birders Week kind of snowballed into all of the Black in movements. So thank y'all for being leaders in a tough time. I also want to highlight an effort led by Dr. Christine Chen, who recently published a preprint about disparities in NSF funding. I did a review on that, and you can find it in one of the playlists on this channel. So she created the Asian Americans and Pacific Islander in Geosciences affinity group. And this is amazing. And if you read their mission statement online, they really talk about the sticky issues that surround the geosciences community and people that identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander. They talk about the model minority myth. They talk about how the Asian diaspora is not a monolith, and there are specific and there are nuanced challenges across Native Hawaiians, East Asians, Southeast Asians, and it also includes Middle the Middle East. I don't know. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go there. But there's a lot of diasporic, subcultural challenges across what we deem as Asian American and Pacific Islander. And so this is also in response to all of the horrible things that were happening in 2020. And so I'm proud of her as well. And the two groups that I've highlighted here are led by really super duper early career people who started these before they got a faculty position. So a lot of that emotional labor, a lot of that solidarity labor fell on the shoulders of people that weren't even like in their final employment. And that says something. It's like you'd think that faculty members who are seemingly at the top of the food chain and have the most security and employment would be able to speak out and lead the movements. I'm not saying that there are no faculty, but the Black in and the Black in movements, a lot of them, and this movement on the screen, it was people without faculty jobs. Keep that in mind. The future is the youth. All right. So I applaud them for their efforts. And now I want to talk about some coping strategies. And y'all, you can take this with a grain of salt. Everyone has their own way of coping. And guess what? That's the correct way. Your way is the correct way. Unless you're a danger to yourself and others. I'll link some links about how to get support if things are out of your control. Now, the article from CNBC mentions that we should perhaps, number one, find a release. So every time your brain thinks about a stressful event, it sends out electrical impulses in the form of like thoughts and emotions, and that actually doesn't go anywhere. It's in your body, if y'all believe in physics and energies. So you have to do something with that. And matter is neither created nor destroyed, right? It just changes forms. So I think what has been my saving grace throughout my life is changing and converting the trauma over to productive work. Now, is that healthy? I don't know, but it's been working for me, okay? A little bit. You can release and convert that energy that gets pumped into your body in the form of like negative thoughts into something creative, like journaling, art, music, poetry, or even prayer, spirituality, and meditation. Just so long as you're actively doing something else and perhaps you're creating and focusing on something artistic, that can be a way to indirectly release the energy that was released into your body due to some exposure to some stressful event. It works. It really works, y'all. The next thing that the article suggests is to attend a public memorial. I've never done it, but the article suggests that maybe this can be cathartic. Number 3 is something I do, being mindful of media consumption. Now, maybe you need to take a week off Twitter or Instagram or something like that. That could be super helpful during these times, especially when there's a lot going on in the media and they're constantly feeding us bad news. It's not that you don't care or you're unengaged, but self-preservation is just as important for your advocacy as being involved. So say you're somebody that's used to being on the front lines and being active in the conversations online. If you're slipping, that mental health is slipping, you're snapping on folks, you aren't eating, you aren't sleeping, it's time to take a step back because, we're not good to anybody if we're run down and negative. Number 4, do something. Just do something different, y'all. I always tell myself, you can't get different results doing the same thing. You just can't. It's physically impossible. So do something different. So add a new activity into your day-to-day, like volunteering. You can volunteer at a shelter for people with house insecurity. You can volunteer at the Y if you are qualified to do so. You can volunteer to be a tutor. You can donate monetarily. Sometimes this can release some pressure if you feel guilt, like, I'm sorry, if you feel like helpless and you feel sad about what's going on around you. Support a cause that it has been vetted. I always say support vetted causes because honestly, we don't know where those funds are going. Or you can donate blood. That's what the article suggests if you want to help on the healthcare front. All right. Now I want to talk about coping strategies specifically for those of us that love to torture ourselves and remain in STEM fields. Y'all, STEM is not easy, okay? It requires you to use a different part of your brain. And I wasn't going to show this this graphic, but I think I will. If you take a look here, you'll see that there is an image of one hemisphere of your brain and the other. And so they're assigning the left side to thinking in words, sequencing, linear thinking, mathematics, facts, and logic. So a lot of us are engaged with that side of our brain a lot. And if you are too engaged or you don't come out of it, your speech will suffer, your social skills will suffer, your creativity suffers. And a lot of people don't realize it, but you need to engage with the other parts of your being to be a well-rounded researcher. All right. And so this other side of our brain, which looks like a really colorful, chaotic mess, but it's actually beautiful. It taps into feelings, visualization, imagination, intuition, rhythm, holistic thinking, and arts. If you want to think about this, ironically, logically, when you start tapping into the other parts of your brain, you're sending energy to the other part of your brain, right? It's all together, and you're kind of rebalancing the I don't know, the electrons in your brain. So that may be helpful for your research, right? And so I'm a strong believer in doing something else to improve something else. So I learned from my advisor, when he's stuck on a problem, he goes and takes a walk, right? And so apparently engaging the bottom of your soul and getting the blood pumping will help with your logical thinking, right? Yeah, so let's go back to the slide. Coping in STEM. So these are my top ways to cope, because since we live over here in our left brain, I find that I desperately need balance. And one of those things is this. So under the hood is my way of balancing what I do all day, every day. It is helping, y'all. It's helping. So number 1, sleep. Y'all, get some sleep. The all-nighters are not healthy. We've seen the papers on sleep deprivation in lab mice. They don't do well. Some of us may need sleep aids, that's fine, but please get some sleep. Whether you're a night owl and you sleep during the day, or you're a third shifter, you have to sleep. And for those of us that are logical thinkers, this is a time where your cells restore themselves. You are pretty much resetting your vital organs and things like that. I'm not a biologist, but that's going to help your research. That's going to help you think. because when the rest of your body is out of whack, it will then send signals to your brain that are going to interfere with your ability to think logically, analyze, and get your work done. So sleep is actually a strategy for being a good researcher. All right. And let me just stop by saying, let me stop in the middle of this list. A lot of us are used to coping in a passive way. And by passive, I mean just going through the day, not really thinking about it, not really planning out our activities. But you have to be intentional and actively engaged in your coping, especially for us STEM folk. We have to plan our sleep, we have to plan our leisure activities, and we have to plan our downtime, or else we won't. A lot of us are workaholics. We won't do it. So it is an active effort to incorporate all of these coping mechanisms into your daily life. This is something I had to do because I was a workaholic. Remember, my trauma response was to study, and that is unsustainable over time. All right. So talk about sleep. Let's talk about caffeine. Raise your hand if you drink a lot of coffee. And if you can't drink coffee, raise your hand if you drink a lot of tea, stimulants like that. Some of us may be on Adderall. All right. I'm not really talking about people who are neurodivergent and need those those chemicals to function. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those of us that are not neurodivergent and we are moderating ourselves with caffeine or getting through the day by just chugging coffee. Once again, this is going to drive a peak crash response, and then you're going to end up losing time anyway in your work. So get to know and be intentional about your relationship to caffeine and stick to it. Don't overdose, because you could end up in the hospital from a caffeine overdose. Non-processed foods. So, y'all, at my big old age, I am still struggling with this one. All right. Because of the convenience. All right. I operate on efficiency. And so I'm like, oh, it's super efficient to go to Chick-fil-A and get the number one and then come home and eat it and then go back to work. It's really efficient. But then I suffer for it a few hours later because processed foods are really hard on the digestive system, and there could be chemicals in there that are interfering with your other hormonal systems, and therefore you can't think. It's a never-ending balance of trying to remain the most efficient, mentally, so that you can get your work done. But all of these decisions are intentional, and kudos to those of you who are superstars at balancing all this, because I'm not. All right. The fourth one is engage your artistic side. And I talked about this with the graphic with the left brain and the right brain. Y'all, any type of creative activity rejuvenates me. I need that. I need to, and don't get me wrong, you can be creative with your plots and your graphs and your research and things like that. But I don't find that to be holistically enough for me. So, yeah. So do something else. Music. Actually, I like to go to comedy shows. That's funny to me. I'm not a big TV watcher. I do watch a lot of YouTube, and I find that gives me the balance I need to get through my research. This fifth one here could be controversial, especially if you're used to having your tight-knit circle and you like being around people just like you. But I think having a social life outside of STEM is really helpful. I know quite a few people who are in STEM, but their best friends are in the arts or in the humanities or social sciences. I find that spending time around people who think differently, who use that other side of their brain, keeps me balanced, right? I talk differently. I use different parts of my brain. And so I feel like, I know I'm being very cerebral about all of this, which is weird, but this is how I think. And so I try to maintain relationships with people that have nothing to do with engineering. It's just better, in my opinion. family included. Your family is included in that life outside of STEM. And you can talk to any of my friends. I don't really talk about work that much. Stay physically active. Okay, this one is important too. And for those of you that need some reasoning as to why you should do this instead of staying in the house and watching TV, well, good circulation helps you think better. Yeah, it does. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but if you've ever gone out for like a hike or a run or played some tennis before you sat down to write a paper, you may find that like your writing is beautiful right after you do some work or right after you do some exercise. The blood is flowing. And so naturally that good circulation makes its way up to your brain, right? Once again, I'm not a biologist. Yeah. Try to remain non-sedentary. I actually want to talk about this in the context of free versus not free activities. You can stay active even if you don't have a lot of money for like these types of activities. If you live near a park, if you're privileged enough to live near a green space. So when I was in grad school, I lived near Piedmont Park, which I think in Atlanta, Georgia, which is one of the most beautiful public parks I've ever seen. They had a nice paved path, and it's relatively free. You can bike there. I used to bike there, and then I'd go for a run, and then I rollerblade, and it's awesome, y'all, in grad school. And for those of you that want to invest a little bit of money into your hobbies, you can join a gym, obviously. You can pay for, I don't know, just you can go to the gym. Hikes are obviously free. And last but not least, clean up. Clean up. It is true. Your environment does influence your ability to concentrate. I used to get made fun of for white walls and plain walls and minimal aesthetic, but that's what I need to focus and to help myself feel like there's not a lot of clutter around me. If you've got a pile of laundry staring at you, that could be impacting your concentration as well, because you may feel guilty because you don't have clean clothes. It's so for those of us that are planners, maybe take half a day on the weekend to dedicate to getting your physical environment up to par. If you need to move, or if you need to like temporarily paint your space and bite the dust when you have to move out, do that. I've done that before. Not bite the dust, bite the bullet. Sorry, y'all. My idioms, I'm getting mixed up. Clean up. Like, don't sit in a filthy environment. Have clean clothes available to you. That's important. Do your laundry. Because for those of us who like prioritize cleanliness, if your environment is filthy, you're not going to be able to concentrate. All right. And so everything I talked about here is related to optimal thinking, like optimal concentration. I do think of my brain as a computer. I think of my brain as my most important piece of equipment for research. And so the food I eat, the caffeine intake, my environment, my social life, my activities, I'm trying to optimize my thinking and my ability to be productive. And the advice I'm giving you is based on like 10, 12, 15 years of trial and error. So this is what I have to do. And I want to temper this by saying it's not always going to happen in good balance. So I'm going to suffer on the food one week. I'm going to suffer on the cleanliness one week. I'm going to suffer on my physical activity another week. But as long as it's in my purview that I need to get back on the horse and do it, I'm okay. And I give myself grace when I can't do it. Shout out to the parents. I cannot speak to that. Give yourself grace. You're doing a great job. All right. This was a bit of a long one. I spoke through the slides longer than I thought I would. So I'm going to end with a few more words of advice. Number one, things that I'm telling myself, right? I'm telling myself this. So be reasonable about how much time it takes to do things. When I was in grad school, I think my advisor said multiply by 2. It always takes twice as long as you think to get something done, especially these days when your brain may be weighed down with all of the stuff that we talked about in the form of media and all that crazy stuff. So just build in more time. And if you don't get to it, don't beat yourself up. I go to counseling. So I've recently picked up going back to counseling, but in grad school, I definitely had a therapist. I try to remain physically active at least once a week. And I have a yoga mat at home to do some stretching, like stretching, just stretch your body. I keep a minimal aesthetic around my house. I can't stand stuff, knickknacks. I don't like I don't like rugs because I think I'm a little bit OCD where I think that dust is just collecting in the rug and it is. And so that's nasty to me. I don't like rugs. And so I just keep a bare floor and I vacuum a lot. The other thing that works for me is rejecting the status quo. Yeah. So I have to do what works for me, my unique life experience, lived experience, personality, likes and dislikes are what works for me. And I don't follow the trends online, and I congratulate others for their unique success, but I also honor my own way of life because that's what works for me. All right. The first person that you need to be loyal to is yourself. Be true to yourself. Right? For that person in the audience that may be listening, I learned that from you. The last but not least, appreciate and be grateful for your journey. I am so grateful for what I've been through because it has made me into the kooky, unique individual that you're looking at right now. And the more unique your path is, the more unique you are. The more diverse your perspective, the more people you're able to touch. Oh, wow. Hi. Thank you for that. Your journey is yours. And just be grateful that you are surviving what you're going through, because there will be someone that comes along and you'll be able to speak specifically to their struggle and you'll be able to help them. So I know exactly my purpose, and that is to use those horrible experiences I went through for the past 17 or so years and to get on this YouTube and to try to help somebody else. Thank you, Marta, for dropping in. And that's the end of office hour. If anybody has questions they want to submit to the form, the link is in the description box, and I'll go back and link all of the stuff that I said I'd link. Have a good weekend.